But let's not fool ourselves here, Mr Deputy Speaker. If Mr Turnbull, the Prime Minister, really wants to support young people, he would not have reintroduced into this parliament measures that will push young people into poverty. The Australian Council of Social Service reports that between 2012 and 2014, poverty rates increased for those receiving youth allowance to over 50%. Research by the Educational Policy Institute found that living costs for university students in Australia are the third highest in the world. It's estimated that 2/3 of Australian university students are living below the poverty line and suffering as a consequence of financial stress. And this figure is even higher for Indigenous students and students from low socio-economic backgrounds. I might interpose at this stage that's, in particular, people from my electorate of Bass. The current rate of youth allowance is almost $160 per week under the median income poverty line. Young people need stable and decent living conditions in order to successfully complete their education, which is difficult to achieve without sufficient income. The recent Universities Conference held here in Canberra highlighted these issues, with representatives noting that the student experience is rapidly changing as the result of needing to balance part-time work with full-time study. Students are facing unprecedented stress from cost of living pressures and the associated issues that arise from tight financial circumstances. Mr Deputy Speaker, I would also echo the sentiments of the opposition leader, Mr Bill Shorten, who recently made the point that this is a government that is at war with young people. There are thousands of Australian students employed in the retail and hospitality sectors who have just had their penalty rates slashed. These are the people affected by the decision that are typically those people who are in low-income households or those in insecure work. Students from my electorate of Bass have called this decision a real kick in the guts because they rely on their weekend penalty rates to make ends meet. The nature of university life means that students tend to do more work outside of normal business hours and on weekends so as to not interfere with their studies. Cuts to penalty rates leave students with the unenviable decision of having to either increase their employment hours to maintain their income, potentially thereby compromising their studies, or copping a pay cut that leaves them unable to afford even the basics. Last week, Mr Deputy Speaker, the member for Gorton visited Bass in his capacity as the Shadow Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. I was able to introduce him to Ruby, who is a part-time university student who works in the retail industry and relies upon her Sunday penalty rates. Ruby explained to the Shadow Minister that these cuts to her penalty rates are, in a word, devastating. Ruby said, "I live paycheck to paycheck at the moment. I rarely save money. Losing that little bit extra makes it a bit harder. People like me, in my situation, we spend money on little luxuries that go back into the community, and it means that I'll have less money to do that, pay the rent and purchase other essentials." Mr Speaker, this Liberal government is no friend to Australia's students and young people like Ruby, despite what they seek to introduce by virtue of this legislation. The Prime Minister is pushing ahead with the legislation that will leave job seekers under the age of 25 with nothing to live on for 1 month. This is a holdover from one of the more toxic zombie measures from the 2014 federal budget, which I must say was a low point in fairness even for this Liberal government. Changes to the eligibility age for Newstart will also push job seekers that are between the ages of 22 and 24 onto the lower youth allowance at a loss of $48 per week. This leaves thousands of students worse off, especially when they graduate and are looking to enter the workforce. Let us not forget that this is the government that also wanted to give our current cohort of students deregulation of university fees, with the risk, a real risk, that many students would leave university with crippling debt.